Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. I am Jamie Moeller, and this is the Grad Connection, where, as I say every time I open these, goal is to try to help graduate students do more than just survive. I want to see you thrive. And so, to kick this off, first, let me say I appreciate all those who have either joined the private Facebook group, subscribed on YouTube. I appreciate likes and comments and all that kind of stuff. It does help me know that hopefully people are finding this content useful. We started the research series, I guess, 2 weeks ago, and so I want to continue in that continue in that vein. And what I've been trying to do is kind of pick off pieces that can be talked about within 10 minutes or so. So hopefully each of these little nuggets are helpful. Today, I want to talk about, before we get into kind of more meaty subjects relative to research, I want to talk about degree types, configurations of degrees, and then overall challenges. My goal is next week to bring a video that talks about kind of a topic that I talk here at Purdue called graduating on time. So I think this will provide a good lead in. So we talk about different degree types. To me, there's kind of like these two major degree types of, and I've talked about other kinds of details on this, I suppose, but the idea of research degrees versus professional degrees. And when we talk about research degrees, really what we're talking about are the PhD and the master's, so the Doctor of Philosophy, as well as a Master of Science or a master's degree. Usually those, and I'm not going to talk about Master of Arts and other kinds of things because I'm not versed in that. At Purdue, we predominantly deal with PhDs and the Master of Science as it relates to a research degree. Now, when I talk about professional degrees, really what I'm talking about are those degrees that are more practical in orientation. They're usually a precursor or a requirement to be able to hold a particular position. So examples of these would be the Doctor of Pharmacy, or we call it a PharmD, the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, or Vet Med degree, the Doctor of Audiology, a Juris Doctorate for lawyers, a medical doctorate for doctors that work in the field of medicine. EDD is one that's common in education, so an educational doctorate. And then you also have things like the Master of Fine Arts, which, in those fields, the MFA is typically seen, if memory serves me correctly, it's like a six-year degree in some cases, or at least most cases, and it's considered a terminal degree. What I would say about all of these doctoral degrees that I'm talking about, including the MFA, there may be other master's degrees where the master's is a terminal degree. In other words, for that particular field, it is kind of seen as the highest degree that one could obtain. And so when we talk about configurations and degrees, I think it's important to understand, at least from an academic standpoint, what the difference between research-based degrees and those that are more practice or professionally oriented. And so, because typically I would say the research degrees are usually comprised of some number of courses or coursework that you take, and then research that follows. So like in a master's degree, you may have a master's degree. Most master's degrees, Master of Science degrees, are 30 credit hours. And typically, you might have coursework that's maybe 24 credit hours, assuming three credit hour classes, right? That's about basically 10 courses if you're talking about 30 credit hours at three credits each. Typically, you might be talking about 24 credit hours worth of coursework, and then the 6 credit hours of research. There's all kinds of configurations, and so anytime you're looking at a degree, particularly a graduate degree of some type, you want to figure out what's the balance of courses versus research credits. There's a high degree of variability across different disciplines, even in the same institution. Now, if you're talking about one of the professional degrees, then oftentimes you're talking about the majority of the courses being, the majority of the credits being coursework that you're going to be taking. Or in some cases, it may be coursework plus exams. And so those exams kind of serve as thresholds or gates that you have to pass to be able to continue in the degree. It might be courses plus certain certifications. It might be, courses and then clinical rotations of some sort. In a medical doctorate, you're talking about you typically do residency. So most of the professional degrees, some professional degrees are just courses. Some professional degrees are courses plus certain gates that might be, exams or certain things you have to do to be able to continue. Or it may be other kinds of experiential types of things. So, I think it's important as I talk about and as I continue to talk about research is most of the things I'm going to talk about are going to be applicable to a PhD or to a Master of Science, right? Now I'll say there are anomalies in this. So, for example, one of the things is there are some professional doctorates that may actually have some kind of dissertation with them. For example, the educational doctorate is one where in some institutions it's just courses. In other institutions it's courses plus a project. In other institutions it's courses plus a dissertation, right? So there's not a one size fits all, and so there are some similarities obviously within fields, but there are these little nuances or little differences that can make it challenging trying to compare things. So that's the first part of this talk. I wanted to talk a little bit about degree types and kind of configurations of them, which is what I've just talked about here. Now, let's dive into this other issue of what I would call overall challenges that you deal with. I think this is unique to research, or this is probably limited to research degrees, but you may find it also within professional degrees. And so I've kind of broken this up into 4 areas that I think are the big challenge areas for graduate students. Number 1 would be just this idea of publishing, because that's usually an expectation in a Master of Science or a PhD degree. Again, if you're looking at these kinds of degrees, you want to look and say, okay, you want to look and see if they actually have any graduation requirements that are publishing requirements. Some departments require that you have 2 or 3 publications under your belt. Some may even go so far as to say, at least one of those you have to be first author. I think it's also important when you're looking at these publishing requirements to look at the nuances of what it says and how it says it. So some programs will say you have to have 3 articles in review, which means they don't have to be accepted yet. They just have to be submitted for review, versus other types of programs where it may actually have to be accepted, meaning that it has to be in press. So like there's these different states. So when an article is printed, it's printed. When it's when I say it's printed, that is, it has been released to the public. It's basically, it's a done deal. However, when you submit an article, there are 2 other states that it can be in that you can report in a curriculum vitae or resume or whatever. One would be when you first submit it and it's in review, you can actually you can actually list it on your resume or on your vitae, on your CV. You can actually list it and note that it is in review. When it's beyond the point of review, in other words, where it's been accepted, but you're making final changes on it, but it hasn't been quote unquote printed yet or released online publicly, that would be what would be called in press, right? And so when you're looking at, and this is, I guess, important for resumes and stuff, but it's also important from the standpoint of looking at the requirements for publishing as a graduate student to say, does the article have to be printed? I mean, does it have to be completely released? Could it be in press? Could it be in review? And let me say, there's one other category that people try to get away with, which is in manuscript, which is a totally bogus moniker, right? In manuscript, a lot of people will try to pad their resume by they'll put stuff in their resume that they're in the process of. If you're in the process of writing, and if it's not, the only valid, in my mind, the only valid examples of this would, or examples not right. The only valid way to list things in your vita is either it's in review, it's in press, or it's a done deal and it's been released, right? There is no in manuscript bullcrap. That doesn't exist. All right, sorry for the diatribe, but sometimes I go down these rabbit trails and hopefully it's useful for you. So first of all, it's just the publishing issue, right? So in the publishing issue, there's a couple issues you have to deal with. First of all is authorship credit. Who gets credit for being an author? And so this is something you're going to want to look at your institution. I would argue, and generally the accepted idea on authorship is you have to materially and intellectually participate in the research project, and you have to materially and intellectually participate in the writing of the article. If you don't do both of those things, you probably should not be an author, at least in my view. And so you have to have this conversation as a graduate student. You need to kind of know what the expectations are in your lab and with your PI and so forth as far as who gets authorship credits. Second issue is author order, because author order does matter. And so trying to have a conversation within your lab or with your PI about, that is your major professor, chair, or whatever, having the conversation about how is author order established. Typically, author order should be established on the level of contributorship. The challenge with that is you may go into an authoring situation where one person is assumed to be doing most of the work, and then you get into it and things change, and then you get to the end of it, and that author order it needs to be switched around because the amount of contribution by each individual shifted. So this is a conversation that you typically want to have at the beginning, at the middle, and the end of any type of authoring thing. Timeliness of review is one of the biggest things that I hear graduate students complain about. Of just not getting feedback from their major professor, their PI, or whatever in a timely fashion. And I can see it from both sides. I mean, I see it from the graduate student side a lot because I deal with graduate students where they're not getting any feedback on their work, and they feel like they're at an impasse of being able to go anywhere. Ultimately, as a graduate student, if you get stuck in an endless cycle where you're not getting any feedback from your major professor, you need couple different actions. One, carry on and just keep writing. Second would be find a new advisor, find somebody who actually has time for you. Third would be to find some other kind of ally or advocate that can help you on the side to provide you feedback on your drafts. But publishing is a big issue that's one of the major issues that can become a point of conflict with graduate students, because oftentimes some institutions don't have a policy. It's best to try to come to some kind of agreement up front, but it's a really hard conversation to have, particularly if it's the graduate student that's trying to spur that conversation, because you're not proverbially you're not in a power position. You're usually at a power deficit, and so that can make it difficult. Ultimately, what I would say is, if need be, try to find someone, an advocate, ally, or someone who can help you mediate these situations. So publishing is one of the very first things. Second would be dealing with issues of employment as a graduate student. So first of all, recognizing that there are all kinds of different contracts that exist. For the most part, at least at Purdue, there are two major types of contracts that we deal with as faculty. You're either on an academic year contract, where you're basically contracted for 9 to 10 months a year. And depending on how you want to get paid, you can have your 9 months worth of pay distributed over 12 months if you wish. Or you can basically just get paid for 9 months, and then you have to figure out how to make up the difference in the months that you're not getting paid. By saving that yourself or whatever, right? So that's what we call an academic year, or 10-month. We call it a 10-month contract, but it's really 9 months, and I won't go into the details about it. But look at the kind of contract. The other would be a fiscal year contract, which is basically a 12-month contract. And so we have graduate students that are on both those types of contracts. Fiscal year contracts are more common when you're on grants or those kinds of things. Academic year contracts or 10-month contracts, those are more if you're a teaching assistant kind of scenario. So you kind of have to look at, what's your contract type? What's it look like for you? Second off is what kind of time off do you get? Oftentimes with academic contracts, you get the normal school breaks off, but you may not get any other time off as far as vacation is concerned. A fiscal year person, you may not get, some of the breaks like spring. You get federal holidays, but maybe not like spring break or October break and that kind of crap, right? So again, different contracts dictate different kinds of things here. And then also, what kind of sick time do you have relative to this? Another thing you deal with employment-wise is what's the climate? What's the environment like for you? Are there interpersonal issues? How is communication? So all of these things wrap around this employment situation or employment issue. And oftentimes graduate students are there's a power differential oftentimes, and the graduate students are oftentimes the lowest on the totem pole. And so it can be difficult to deal with or address these kinds of things. Key thing is knowing if you're having problems, what's kind of the chain of command that you need to follow. I would start by talking with your PI, your principal investigator, whoever it is your direct supervisor, and it's usually a faculty member. Whether you're teaching or research or whatever, it's usually a faculty member. And then if you have issues with that, then kind of follow the chain of command. Talk with your department head or whoever the next person is up. It's best not to totally jump and circumvent that chain of command because all it does is make people mad. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's typically what happens. And if all else fails, oftentimes you can communicate with human resources. But I will again say, my experience is oftentimes with graduate students being lowest on the totem pole, they're oftentimes maybe not treated like other employees at the institution, so that could be a challenge. Number 3 area is academics. Determining, so the challenges you're going to have is, what are the load expectations? What's a full-time load as a student? Now, because you're really trying to balance your academic, that is the courses you're taking, your employment, whether that be TA, RA, GA, whatever. And then also, if you're taking research credits on top of that, it can be very difficult to manage or balance those 3 things. And we're not even talking about the rest of your life, right? We're just talking about the things that revolve around school. And so be aware of particularly as it relates to academic progress, making progress in your degree. Be aware of the policies that relate to you. I mean, nobody's going to care more about your life than you are. And oftentimes faculty don't know all of the ins and outs of every policy. Maybe you would argue that they should, but I'm just telling you they don't. And so if you depend oftentimes on your faculty to know all the rules, you're going to miss some. It would be better for you to educate yourself by looking at like university level policy. At Purdue, we have graduate school policy, and then departments can also have policies. That basically, and essentially it goes from kind of high level generic policies to more specific. And sometimes departmental policies can be tougher or more strict than school or college policies. So you're gonna have to take that into your own hands. You need to know it, and just ignoring it and trusting that someone else is going to work it out for you is just naive. You need to take the situation into your own hands and become a master of become master aware of the policies and stuff. Another challenge academically is our research expectations. I think some faculty have truly unrealistic expectations, but oftentimes it's because they work like a dog. They work for unending hours. They pour themselves, and all they do is focus on work. If you work for a person that's the only thing they focus on, that's going to be the expectation for you, like it or lump it. And so one of the things I would encourage is, as you're looking at faculty that you want to work with or in labs that you want to work in, it's something you need to look at. So what can you do with these challenges? Well, first of all, looking for allies and advocates. Usually there are department coordinators that try to help with graduate studies. Graduate secretaries, and secretaries in general, you want to treat them like gods and goddesses because they are the ones that really know how everything works, and they're the ones that can get things done. If any academic or academic administrator were truly honest, it's truly the administrative staff, department coordinators, secretaries, department head secretaries, and the like. They are the ones that are the real brains of the operations, and oftentimes they can help you sort things out. So make friends with them for sure, and I would treat them better than you treat pretty much anybody else, because they can help you, or they can be the biggest roadblock for you as well. And you could look for other admins as well. And then lastly, and I know this is going a little bit long, but the last thing that I put down on this list of a challenge is kind of this idea of work-life harmony, work-life balance, if you want to call it that. I'm a big believer that if you sacrifice, and so to me there are 5 areas in your life: body, mind, spirit, relationships, and work, right? And if you sacrifice any of the other 4 for work, you're going to be sorely disappointed once and I understand at different times, different aspects of different ones of these are going to take more attention. That's why I like the idea of work-life harmony than I do liking the work-life balance, is because all you're trying to do is harmonize. In one week, you may have to spend more time on work than you do on exercise, or you may have to one week, but it's over the long term, making sure you're trying to balance that over the longer haul. And so just one of the things that you can help with this is just to make sure that you have some level set on expectations, that you one of the things that gets really hard for graduate students is separating employment. Like, let's say you were doing research, and that's your job at the university, but then you also have your personal research, and balancing those two things can be difficult. So creating boundaries, I think, is important. Managing your time is the biggest, most critical thing I can tell you to do, is to find a way to manage your time. And I schedule everything. And some people actually abhor that idea or just cannot fathom scheduling everything. But it's the only way that I think you can make all of these things work, and work in somewhat of a harmonious way. So this is kind of another one of these catch-all sessions or catch-all videos where I'm kind of talking about things that are kind of in general. Now, the next video that I present next week's video is going to be on graduating on time, and I'm going to talk about, and a lot of it may be specific to Purdue, but you might find it helpful anyway. I'm not sure, but I want to talk about graduating on time, because my experience has been, quite honestly, most graduate students don't graduate on time because they don't plan to graduate on time. Now, I'm kind of borrowing a phrase from a guy named Dave Ramsey. He talks about that in terms of undergraduate students, but I think it's even more true for graduate students. So hopefully you found this video useful. I know it's kind of strange that I'm putting one of these out early in the week, but I've got a little vacation planned to get away this weekend, so I wanted to get this out to you today. Again, always looking for feedback. If you're finding certain things useful, or even things that are not useful, I certainly am all ears to always try to make this content as relevant and as useful as possible. Again, my whole goal is try to help you grow, help you expand, and you and me both try to help us suck less. So hopefully you're finding this useful. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye-bye.